Right. Thank you very much. We are going to get started right now. And it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Carrie Dornan, who is our speaker today. I met her at a conference in Carlsbad a few months ago, and I just walked up to her. We struck up this conversation, and before long, we were trading a little bit of, war stories about our different careers. And then I said, I would like you to talk to my students. And I'm happy to say that she was very enthusiastic and said, yeah, I'll do it. And so here we are. So for those of you who have always wondered how, what kind of journey take people from a PhD in biology to running, pharmaceutical drug development in a place like Gilead, I think Carrie is going to let you in on a little bit of the secret today. So I will let Carrie take it from here.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for inviting me today. I really appreciate that. I know there's probably a lot of different interests in the audience. And what I'm trying to do today is kind of show different options in the pharmaceutical industry and, just to see if any of them strike your interest. And I think even more importantly, if nothing strikes your interest, I think that's just as important to check things off the list. So that's really my goal today, to kind of walk through pharmaceutical drug development. And keeping in mind it's a perspective from non-clinical safety, and I'll go into what that actually means. And it's in a large pharma company, which is very different across different small biotechs to large pharma, and we'll go into that as well. So I'll do a little bit of introduction and talk a little bit about drug development pathways and company characteristics, highlighting Gilead Sciences' focus, and then talking again, as I said before, about non-clinical safety, what that is, what that means, what that career route looks like. And then we had some questions put out there in the beginning to try to address. And I think on the surface, some of these questions might look simple, but if you are a second or third year undergrad, I don't think these questions are simple. I think they're really challenging. I think it's really stressful. And you could be sitting there thinking, I got student debt, I have a clock running, what should I be doing with my time right now? And so, let's dig into that at the end. And again, this is a perspective from just one person, but feel free, talk to many, many people and get all of that 360. I welcome that. I know in the bio, there was a little bit about me. I've just sort of drawn out an outline, very, very high level, 30,000 feet of my path. I'm originally from Wisconsin, actually northern Wisconsin. And so I went to my undergrad at St. Norbert College, and that's a very small liberal arts college near Green Bay. And then moved on to graduate school for a doctorate program at the Medical College of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. And from Milwaukee, then, I did a little bit of a postdoc there as well. My focus was actually nothing to do with what I do right now as a career. My focus there in my graduate school career was ocular development, color vision, photoreceptors, and glaucoma. And again, like I said, I don't do any of that now, but we'll talk about translative skills and how I think that's helped. After that, I moved just 1 hour west to Madison, Wisconsin, where I worked for almost 5 years at LabCorp. At the time, it was called Covance Laboratories. And what that is a contract research organization. It's a CRO is what it's called. And pharmaceutical companies go to these labs, pay them to run studies. And these studies are then incorporated into regulatory documents that you can submit for the FDA to try to get a drug first in human, try to get a drug approved. And so I worked at LabCorp as what's called study director. And I'll just say it's a great first landing place to get really good industry experience to learn the process. It's not easy work, but I think it was really highly valued to get me where I am now. It was a large move across the country, and that's to Foster City, California, where I am now at Gilead. I've been here for about 12 years. And as I'm looking at this in this overview, I have an asterisk there, and it's really, this is what LinkedIn says I did. And at the end, what I would like to do is kind of fill everybody in on what the real route was with all of the twists and turns and pivots, as we were just talking previously before the talk started. So I went from something that looked more like the snow to some gorgeous sunsets with these two characters in my life. These are my two dogs, Cash and Jack. I'm also joined in California by my husband, and each of us have two children together as well. So that's where we landed. And I'll tell you a little bit, like I said, about what I do at Gilead, what Gilead is about, what pharmaceutical companies do, and kind of the process, but really focus on what kind of job opportunities are there. And as I said, as I'm talking through them, I'm just asking you to think about, does anything trigger your interest and go, oh, that I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. Maybe that's interesting to me. So we'll kind of get started. So this is probably something that people have seen before. If you sat through any sort of drug development talk from any pharmaceutical company, this is how to make a drug. This is so high level, but I think it gives a really nice picture of, for somebody entering into the space for the first time, how do we even think about developing a drug, and what's our goal here? And certainly the goal at Gilead is to develop drugs for unmet medical needs. These are high impact drugs. These are populations that have not good options. And that's really what drives us to be here every day. And I think that's what drives most people to be at pharmaceutical companies every day. We'll go into the different classes of drugs that we look at, but where does it all start? If we're starting organically in the company, we start at the stage of preclinical. So this is at a stage where there is no drug in a tube, nothing that has been gone into human yet. This is all thoughts on paper. A lot of in silicos going on here. We'll talk about AI that can go on here. And this is drug discovery. And the chemists play a major role here. And so when the chemists are thinking about the drug, then you're thinking about, well, I've got a drug. Maybe it's a powder on a lab bench. How am I actually going to get this into a human, right? And that's where other chemists come into play, formulation development. Is it soluble? Can you even get this into a pill form? And then pharmacology, what does it actually do? What's the mode of action in the body? And then for me, what strikes home is I'm a toxicologist. Not only does a drug need to be efficacious, it needs to work, but it also needs to be safe. We can't give a drug to somebody where it's efficacious, but the side effects are completely unacceptable. And so I focus on toxicology packages. Is that drug safe? How can we put it into people? How can we get this first in human into what's called a phase 1 study? What dose level can we start at? What kind of side effects might we anticipate? And so I mentioned what I'd like to do during this is kind of bring along what those different roles are. Now, again, I'm being a little biased. I'm a toxicologist. Here I am here. But as I work these drugs up, and I'm on teams constantly, this is not in a vacuum whatsoever, ever. We're on teams in the preclinical phase. Specifically, I've focused on the teams that I work with mostly in preclinical phase in this blue box. I mentioned chemists that are really going to be a focus in the beginning specifically. And then manufacturing chemists, formulation chemists. The biologists work in the pharmacology. So if you were to go to the job website right now at Gilead, you might see an ad for biologist, pharmacology, and some specialty that they're looking for. And that's the biology pharmacology department, as I mentioned. Those are people who are going to try to make a drug that works. The toxicologist, if you go to the Gilead website right now, there might be a couple positions open for toxicologists. And again, what I said is those are the people that are going to think about, how do we make the drug safe? Biomarkers. How do we know the drug's working? Can we take a blood sample and measure that so we don't have to go in and take a biopsy? Pathology. Are we going to see some impact to organs? Are you the type of person that likes to look under a microscope? You might be more of an introvert. If you're a pathologist, you're going to be with a microscope most of the day and you're going to be writing up your findings. Does that sound interesting to you? Bioinformatics, biostatistics, those are going to be people with more of an IT focus. They're going to gather a lot of information, try to drive us in the right direction. What kind of patients are these going to really help? Law students, they might be thinking about, if you're pre-law, but I really like biology. How could I combine those? We have a whole suite of IP lawyers here on site, and they're going to be in our meetings and they're going to be saying, how do we protect our asset? legally from a patent point of view? When should we file patents? Are there other patents out there that we're infringing upon? Are we going to get in trouble if we try to publish something that's already out there? So I think there's real opportunity for folks that have a variety of background interests and maybe majors right now that can think about, oh, there's actually more expanded roles here in pharmaceutical companies than I thought about. And then project managers, are you the type of person that really likes to look at timelines, make sure people get their jobs done, keep on top of things, think about strategy. And those PMs are really important at those preclinical stages. Once the drug is thinking, you were thinking that the drug, okay, we're safe, we're efficacious, we know how to deliver it to the human. We want to go into phase 1 studies. And what kind of folks need to come on board now? So once our drug becomes towards this level of the timeline, we start incorporating other folks. And sometimes people think about, oh, that's the other side of the street. Those are development people. Those aren't research people. When in fact, we're really integrated. And those are, I would just go through these quickly. Regulatory affairs. Are you the type of person that really likes to think about standard operating procedures, regulatory guidelines? How do I interact with the FDA? Even if it's not FDA, what are those other regulatory agencies outside of the US that we want to launch a drug in? And so regulatory affairs might be something that's interesting for you. We have many, many clinicians on site at Gilead, and the majority are MDs. Some have clinical experience. Some have been clinicians and practiced in the field and have decided, I think pharmaceutical is where I want to be. That's the majority of the clinicians that I've worked in. They have practiced in the clinic. They have different specialties, whether it's immunology, maybe they are somebody who's been a rheumatologist in the past, or I work very closely with a pediatric oncologist. They work hand in hand with clinical operations people. They're the people that are going to get things done. They're going to schedule the clinical trials. Clinical pharmacology are folks that are going to think about how does this drug act in the body once we get data back. We always need medical writers. Are you the type of person that loves to write? You're going to sit down with a data set and put it together. It's a real talent. Are you a medical writer that's interested in writing a regulatory document? Patient safety, they're usually MDs as well. They're thinking about the safety signals that come back once we're in phase 1 or phase 2 or phase 3. Medical affairs, how do we communicate these data outside of the company? What's our messaging on our marketed drugs? What's our messaging on drugs that are in development? And then business development people, I work with these folks weekly, and they're really thinking about what are the other companies out there that we could collaborate with? What are some academic institutions we can collaborate with? And then what other companies are we interested in, either their platform, their technology, or maybe they have some drug assets that would pair nicely with what we already have. So I took a lot of time to go over a lot of different roles, but again, I just wanted folks to think about if there's anything here that triggered some interest, or like I said, maybe you thought you listened to this and you thought, you know what, none of that's really that interesting to me. And that's okay too. But the other point I wanted to bring up is that this is the perspective from a large pharma. Small pharma or small biotech, very small startups. There's companies as small as 1 or 2 people, 20 people, 40 people. They're not going to have all of these different members in their company. You're going to wear a lot of different hats, and you're going to outsource to maybe consultants that can do some of this work for you. So this is strictly coming from a large pharma perspective. So I talked about size of pharmaceutical companies. What does a big company look like? Well, I think if you look down the left-hand side of this slide, you'll recognize most, if not all of these names. These are big pharma companies. These are massive companies. This is total revenue from 2024, $58 billion of revenue. Now, this is a huge drop for Pfizer. And if you're thinking, why would they have dropped that much in 1 year? Think about COVID. Think about the vaccines that they sold before that. So that's reflecting in this dip that they're seeing, but they're still at number 1. How big is that? 88,000 employees. Think about that. They're global. So when you're thinking about skill sets, you're thinking about, I need to know how to work in a team. And I think most people on the line right now are very familiar with working remotely, how to get things done on a team without being in the same room. I think that's really important skill. Gilead does not make the top 10 here. We are $28 billion and we're about 18,000 employees and growing. So just for some perspective. What do we do? Okay. So different pharmaceutical companies have different focus. Some are going to be pediatric, some are going to be orphan, some are going to focus on things like very common sort of generics maybe. Gilead has these 3 therapeutic areas that they focus on. The first is virology, and this has really been the main focus for Gilead for most of Gilead's life, if you will. The focus is HIV, absolutely. They're one of the leading HIV companies, and that's really where you're going to see us almost everywhere and in commercials. We also have oncology. We have a partner company that is a subsidiary. It's called Kite, and Kite does more of cell therapy. But in oncology, we're really growing as a portfolio. And then lastly, we're also growing in terms of inflammation. So things like lupus, things like arthritis, things like IBD, Crohn's, that's where you're thinking about for inflammation. We have about 50 clinical stage programs, opt-in programs. Those are programs that we have in a business deal. When I mentioned business development, that we might partner with other companies. And then you can see, I won't read these to you, but number of phase 1, 2, and 3 trials going on and over 25 approved products. This is updated as of November 24, always changing every quarter. We'll have another update coming out. Okay, let's just talk a little bit about HIV. Why is this important? So if you're a chemist online, you might automatically shoot your eyes over to the lower left-hand corner. Oh, that looks really kind of interesting and cool to you. Other people might look at that and go, I don't really care about that whatsoever. So again, just another sort of check for you on every slide. You know, what looks interesting to me? The lead seller for Gilead for HIV is a drug called Biktarvy, and it's made up of 3 individual drugs, and they're co-formulated together into 1 pill once a day. And I just had the opportunity when I started, it was February 2013, that I got to start day 2 on this drug. It wasn't even chosen as a drug yet, and that was the exciting part for me, working through this and getting this to launch in 2018. And so why is this exciting? These are folks that can basically hold their HIV RNA copies to less than 50 copies per mil over a year, 2 years, 3 years by taking this 1 pill once a day. We have a large impact to people worldwide living with HIV. We have a lot of programs that are working on long acting. Maybe you can get an injection and it can last months where you don't have to take 1 pill once a day. How about prevention? You know, what can we do to prevent in high-risk areas for people contracting HIV? So I think this is a really proud area of Gilead in which a lot of progress has been made. Here's all the approved drugs. In 1987, if people have, I know we have a younger crowd here than I am, but I remember the HIV/AIDS pandemic coming out, where in 1981, first AIDS cases reported in the United States, and it became a pandemic. And you can see as time rolled forward, all of those different drugs that have become available to those people living with HIV. And just kind of to highlight, Gilead really came on the scene with Truvada here in a fixed dose combination, 2004, and all the way up to, this is lenacapavir, Cabo. These are very, very, exciting, really big advancements in the treatment of HIV. And now that what this slide is just showing us is that HIV, doesn't have to be this death sentence. And the total of people living with HIV, for example, and this is global, is staggering. People living with HIV, people acquiring HIV, but then people dying. And our goal is to get that number to 0, to curing HIV. That is the goal for Gilead and certainly for HIV companies around the world, especially in certain heavily affected areas. What else do we work on? Oncology. Oncology, unmet medical needs. It's a highly challenging area to work on. One of our lead compounds is called Trodelvy. It's marketed. So there are people that at Gilead, what they do, one of the reasons I put this picture up here is they design the logo. They design the bottle, they design the wording that goes on the box. All of this has to pass through team approval, regulatory approval. How do we design the bottle? What's in the bottle? Are there any contaminants here that are going to impact when the doctors actually administer this? So again, a lot of jobs that maybe you don't know about yet, and to think about, oh, there's actually a career in this and something that is interesting. If you're more of a chemist, again, the lower right-hand panel might be interesting to you. Trodelvy is called an anti-TROP2, so it's a targeted antibody drug conjugate. So it's actually an antibody, it's an IgG antibody that has bioconjugation site at about 7 to 8 sites along the antibody, which just contains a long linker here in green, a lot of PEG here for solubility for those chemistry geeks out there. And then what it has is a payload at the end, which is a topoisomerase 1 inhibitor. And so if you're thinking about cell biology, you're like, what is a topoisomerase 1 inhibitor? Remember DNA replication? Yeah, this is going to get in there and stop it. And so basically administering this ADC to people with, and it is approved specifically in breast cancer currently, is hopefully going to bind to TROP2 expressing cells, which are majority cancer cells, and the tumor growth inhibition should be impacted. And that was the goal of this drug, and it was successful, and it is approved today for that. And this is just showing a little bit more of the chemistry on the side of Trodelvy. This is why we do what we do right here, guys. This is an overall survival curve. And this is patients without brain mets, albeit these are breast cancer patients. And you can see the line in green are the breast cancer patients that are treated with sacituzumab govitecan, which is the name for Trodelvy, versus standard of care, which is chemotherapy. What does this mean? This is the overall survival curve of these people over the duration of months. And this is sort of a snapshot of the numbers here, month by month by month. So this is not like the HIV curve where you're looking at relative copies of RNA. These are people and whether they're surviving. And how can we increase their quality of life, and how can we increase their duration of life? Again, a serious unmet need. If this resonates with you, drug development might be where you want to be. So again, what this is people working in teams, people working, communicating constantly, and we're trying to get this forward as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible. Our goal is drug approval, which is at the end, and this is no minor feat. This takes a lot of people and a lot of time and a lot of money. And so you think about clinical trials. What does this mean? I mentioned phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. What does this actually mean? This is a way to evaluate the drug initially for how does it act in the body? Is it safe? And those are really the primary objectives of phase 1. These drugs have never been in people before, so we're really going to limit the number of participants. If you're looking at HIV or inflammatory drugs, maybe you're going to look at healthy volunteers first. If you're looking at oncology drugs, you're probably going to go straight into patients because we just saw on the previous slides where their overall survival is at stake. We're going to try to do whatever we can. And so the phase 1 looks really different in terms of where you're going with this. It's, like I said, is this HIV, other companies, it's a dermatitis versus stage 4 terminal cancer. It looks very, very different. And the regulatory agencies, obviously understand that and have guidances about that. The goal of the preclinical team is to get that first in human dosing done. And again, you need to make sure that you're efficacious, prove that non-clinically, either in animal models or cellular models, and is it safe? What is the toxic dose? The drug then moves into phase 2, where you're going to expand the number of participants. You're going to look more on efficacy, because hopefully you have the safety and the pharmacokinetics, how this acts in the blood and in maybe the tumor, how it affects your HIV copies in the phase 1, that you'll have that understood. You'll move to phase 2, expand the number of participants, and really look at efficacy. You'll then move on to usually a phase 3, unless you're accelerated and you're in oncology and it's just gangbusters and they want you to get it to patients as soon as possible. But phase 3 is really where you're going to have the most participants, and that's where you're going to gather the most of your data and go to FDA for review and say, I now have this entire package of data that we are very confident in that this is going to be safe and efficacious and meet unmet medical needs. And that package is massive. There's a lot of data there. And I mentioned medical writers. This is where you're going to hit the ground running. You're going to be very busy as a medical writer. You're going to make sure that these documents are written up in the way they need to be written up, and that you're hitting the button and everything's in the right format for the FDA to review. The FDA has some time to review that, and they might either approve it or they might say, go back to the drawing board with certain parts of it. We're not sure about parts of this. Phase 4 is that you're always going to keep collecting follow-up data on your drug. Are there any new safety signals coming forward? Are these expanding into other indications that we should be thinking about? But the drug approval process, it's a long one. This can take anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 years to get a drug through, and you're not always successful with one drug. If you're okay with risk, you can work in a pharmaceutical company. What I mean that is that these are clinical trial statistics. What's the likelihood of approval? That you're going to have a drug approved once you start phase 1, and you're going to go through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and approval. What is the likelihood that you're actually going to get this through? Actually going to get a label, and you're going to be able to reach out and impact people with these unmet medical needs? Well, here's the percentage of success right now. This is a paper, although it's a bit outdated, it's 2016. In hematology, you're about a quarter. You're in oncology, that's a 5%. And so what I'm saying is that if you're okay with working on something and giving it a shot and maybe having to let it go, then this is the job area for you. But if you want 100% success all the time, this is probably not for you. This is a hard area. These are very tough indications. And luckily, there's a lot of competition right now, which is an amazing thing. And so hopefully we can drive this number up so that the likelihood of approval is higher, so that we're more efficient, we're not spending as much time on things that aren't going to work, and we can be more on target with what we're trying to achieve. How many drugs get approved? How often is this happening? And so, as I said, I'm going to have a lot of figures throughout the talk, and this is another one. This is just showing the number of FDA approvals, and I guess FDA is just US. I'm not talking about ex-US, anything outside of the US, but this is showing all the way back from 2005 how many drugs were approved at that time versus now. So we're doing a lot better. Is it because we're more efficient? Is it because there's more money out there? Well, is it because we have better processes? I think that answer is to be determined. I think there's a lot of up and down in the market right now to tell us that. But what we do know is that we are increasing in the number of cell and gene therapy drugs. We're definitely increasing on the large molecule drugs. So these are multiple kilodalton drugs. They're biologics. They're the antibodies. They're big drugs to make. Versus small molecules, they've always been sort of that constant throughout. So it's just, again, a bit of a picture of the growth, the development throughout the last 20 years or so, and what's changed in terms of where we're looking for the best drug targets. Okay, clinical trials. We talked about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. There are people that are in unmet medical need situation. They're looking for another chance of something experimental. Where do you go? What if your mother, your brother, your cousin, your best friend is diagnosed and they say, go find a clinical trial? What does that even mean? Well, there's a lot of clinical trial sites that are associated with hospitals, with institutions across the US, and absolutely ex-US. I'm just focusing on US here. And I really liked this slide that I found. I hadn't seen this slide before, but I thought it was really kind of neat. It actually shows where's the most concentration of this? Where's the most cities with clinical trial facilities? And maybe not surprising, New York, Houston, Los Angeles, they really top the list. And then where are the cities that are actually the most high throughput, conducting the most trials? Again, Boston, East Coast, Houston, Texas is a hotspot for a clinical trial. And then what about by condition? How many clinical trials are actually going on? This is a lot going on in the country. There's a lot of clinical trials, especially, as I said, in the area of oncology. There's a hard focus of this. And maybe not so exciting on this when I was looking through it is these other clinical trials down at the bottom here. We probably all know somebody with some of these issues or struggles, and there's not as many clinical trials. Why is that? Those are tough clinical trials to run. They're expensive, and if you remember back to the success rate, maybe some of these are sort of falling at the end where it's not that successful either. So, where do pharmaceutical companies put their money? Who's running these trials, and what are the clinicians out there who are willing to take up these trials and run them? I focused a lot on US and I talked a lot about FDA. Just this slide is really just to show folks that we have a lot of ex-US health authorities that we also submit drug applications to. If you want to market in China, you need to work through the NMPD, or sorry, NMPA. If you want to market through Japan, you have to have affiliates to discuss with the PMDA. Again, Australia, TGA. And so a company like Gilead does do this, and it really depends on where the unmet medical need is and globally, and where that marketing opportunity is, and who we can work with as an affiliate. So while we focus a lot on the US and FDA, we certainly work throughout the globe on these other ex-US health authority agencies. So I want to put this slide up here because I think people think about, oh yeah, I got that antibiotic, or I got that drug from the drugstore, and it has this like bunch of garbage paper in it. What is this, you know? Hey, don't throw it away. Take a look at it. It's actually pretty cool. And maybe it's only cool to those that, you know, have these interests in things like chemistry or clinical pharmacology or toxicology. It's a big label. It's all that information that the agency has said, hey, this is really important for the patient to know, for the prescribing doctor to know about this drug. Are there any maybe drug interactions that you want to know about, that you can't take this with another medication? What are the warnings and precautions? This one's specifically for Trodelvy. Remember, Trodelvy was the antibody drug conjugate that I mentioned before for oncology. And so there are big warnings here: neutropenia, diarrhea, nausea, vomiting. Don't take this if you're pregnant. You know, there's a lot of labeling here that are really important. Out of the years and years that I might work on a drug, this is the one part of the label that I got to write. And it's a very small part. It's very exciting when you're part of a team that gets to actually develop something. And I got to do that for the drug that I mentioned before, which is Biktarvy for HIV. So I just want to draw attention to this. If you're interested in any of this, pop open that label, take a look at it. And there's even chemistry structures on there for those. This is really just a little bit more about what I do, you know, as a focus. If you're interested in toxicology, this is a slide for you. This is just an example of a timeline for how do we get data to the FDA, for the FDA to go, yep, you're safe to proceed, go. You can dose humans now. We have to conduct, we're just bucketing it into 3 categories here for maybe a non-oncology indication: small molecule, remember I mentioned the small versus large, and to try to get into a phase 1 clinical trial. This is just an example. We're going to do safety pharmacology. Is this going to have a direct effect on your CNS? Is your breathing going to stop? Are you going to have heart palpitations? We need to de-risk that before we go into the clinic. What happens to somebody when you repeat dose this, when you dose it every single day? Do you get heart tox? Do you get muscle degradation? Do you get liver enzyme elevation? We need to know that before we go into human. Gene tox. Is this going to have aberrant issues on the nucleus in the cell, basically the DNA? Are you going to have breaks in the DNA? Are you going to mutate the DNA? Is this going to, you know, be a risk factor for actually causing cancer when you're trying to help people? And so those are the packages of studies that I'm part of a team that we put this together. We run most of these studies at a CRO. If you recall in the beginning of the slides, I worked at LabCorp. That's an example of a CRO. We outsource these studies. We do not do these studies on site at Gilead. This is 100% outsourced. But that's not the point, is it? We want to get this to an NDA, a new drug application, so that we can actually get this to patients and launch this drug. So are we done as a non-clinical group? Absolutely not. What else do we need to do? We need to do more repeat dose. We need to dose for longer. We need to dose in rats, mice, or a non-rodent species, a monkey or a dog, for longer. We need to actually run a 2-year carcinogenicity study. This study runs for 2 years. We're dosing rat or mice to say, does this cause tumors at all? We want to make sure this is safe for people to take chronically. Does this cause embryo-fetal development issues? If a woman gets pregnant, is this going to cause developmental problems for the fetus? Is this going to impact fertility? Are sperm counts going to go down? Are there going to be uterine issues? And how does this affect next generations? Other tox studies, are you going to be photosensitive if you take this? Can you dose this to younger patients or not for a pediatric indication? So it's just a sampling of other studies that we need to do before this study goes to the FDA to ask for approval. And so I think I've talked about most of this so far in the other slides, but again, what's that purpose of those non-clinical safety studies that we're doing in animals, that we're doing in vitro? It's really to characterize those toxic effects. What are the organs impacted? Are they monitorable? Maybe you have liver enzyme elevation, but you can monitor that. So in an oncology indication, they're going to say, that's okay, that's an acceptable toxicity, we can monitor for that. What if you have heart toxicity? Not so easily monitorable, right? Is it reversible? If something happens and can you go off the drug, is it reversible? Is this on target or off target? Is this an anticipated action of the drug or not? And what kind of doses and exposures? How much can you take before you start seeing some sort of toxicity? These data can also help support the selection of first in human doses. Remember, we went up to that point of IND where they said, yep, safe to proceed. But that's not just, they don't just say safe to proceed. The FDA is going to say, yes, we agree with what dose you're starting at, how you're going to dose it, and how you're going to dose escalate to get to a point where you're actually going to be efficacious. But you're always going to start lower than efficacious dose so that you can monitor the safety as you dose escalate. We can then also provide guidance to the clinical team on toxicities to monitor. And we've already talked about the contributions to the product label. This is just an example. I have to go to a meeting after I have a package of data on tox and say to everybody, okay, we want to go into humans, but we saw myelotoxicity, we saw cardiac toxicity, and we saw male infertility in our animal studies. Are we okay? If it's oncology, you might be okay. Again, those are patients that have really acute unmet need. Maybe the efficacy is so overwhelming that you can handle this type of toxicity because we talked about, is it monitorable? So myelotoxicity would be hematology. Are you seeing drops in things like neutrophils? Are you seeing drops in red blood cell? You're going to be anemic after you take this. Well, we can monitor that. Cardiac tox, that's a hard one. As I mentioned, that's a hard one to monitor. But we can certainly make sure that we exclude patients that have any history of cardiac tox. We can look for anything on an echocardiogram to make sure that we catch it as soon as we can. Male infertility, this is really common to see male infertility with any cytotoxic drugs. They're highly dividing cells, spermatogenesis. If you've taken your cell biology course, you know that's a highly replicative environment. If it actually accumulates in the testes, we're going to have male infertility, and we need to inform male patients to seek advice about that. So again, this is just sort of a look at, I've gathered my non-clinical tox data package. I now know what to look out for in humans. I'm going to let FDA know that, and I'm going to see if they agree with me that this is okay to go forward with. And again, when I say me, I mean an entire team. Okay, I'm almost to the last part. I think we're about at time, but I think what I've talked about a lot is things that haven't changed dramatically in the last couple decades. They're things that we've done to support drug development. It's things we need to do, and it's guidances that, while they evolve, they don't take major steps. But I think what this next generation is obviously dealing with, and maybe you're doing a ChatGPT on the side right now, you probably are. You probably do this on the daily. You know, I was looking at Gemini last night asking how to plan a trip, basically. We're doing this every day in our lives, is what I'm saying. So why not do this in drug development? I just said this could take 15 years. Is there a way that we can make this more timely, more efficient, and save on resources so that we can actually get to patients faster? How can we do this? And we're really passionate about this. And the FDA is seeing this coming. So you can see, well, this is right now. This is a guidance that was just put out by the FDA. January 2025, it's a draft guidance. It's not final. It's open for comment. And they're really proposing different considerations for the use of AI to support regulatory decision-making. And so how are they using this actually? So it's very applicable, it's very pertinent. Right now is a very hot time. And so, you know, again, just to drive home that generative AI has accomplished all these things that we didn't think was possible without, you know, a human expert. But we can just see that, and sorry to say, that ChatGPT has passed the law school exam, right? And so, again, just sort of an example of, or several examples of how we can utilize this and make healthcare faster and target our patients. So potentially we could apply this in the biotech industry. Could we apply this to diagnostics and imaging? I was just reading this morning about a Stanford program that was really incorporating a lot of images to try to basically targeted for precision medicine mostly, to diagnose patients, to know what's going to work for the patients quicker so that they're not on a drug for a long time and then oh, it never even worked. Let's switch to another drug. How can we predict with more sensitivity with AI? How can we do that with manufacturing and process optimization? It takes a long time to manufacture some of these drugs. How can we do this quicker, faster? Can we use AI to bring this in and accelerate what we can do to help develop targeted therapies? Trends. These are just numbers. Obviously, it's on the increase. The number of research investments in AI tech for advancements increasing. The amount of startups that are really focused on AI applications have increased. I think we're only going to see this increase even more as these are going to go into different rounds of early series funding. People are almost going to expect, what's your AI? How is that incorporated into that? And how can we adopt this in the industry? So this is growing, and this is the direction it's going. And so if you're sitting there in the audience right now and you're thinking, well, I'm not a chemist, but man, I really am interested, and this is what I'm doing is a lot of AI, IT, how we can make coding faster. Pharmaceutical could be an exciting place for you. I don't think you have to be a hardcore chemist to be able to think about how you can contribute to this. It's kind of exciting. Okay, so we're getting to the practical stuff now. Does Gilead have internship programs? They do. We have a growing internship program. And how do you get into it? Here's a website that you can go search for, and you can search and look at locations and functional categories and job level. What do they have? I mentioned medical writers, I mentioned regulatory, I mentioned toxicology. There are internships available for all of those. Yes, they are highly competitive. Absolutely apply early. Network. A lot of them do require graduate work experience, some do not. So you really have to look through the postings and really check for those individual positions for experience needed. What do you expect? Depends, 8, 9, some of them are 10 weeks long. There's mentorship. You have an identified project for the summer. Usually it's a summer project where you will present the research project at the end of the term. So it's always fun. In early August, we get to go and attend the summer intern presentations, and they always blow me away. I think they're fantastic. And are they paid? Yes, they are paid. You're not volunteering your time. You are getting paid for these, and the majority are on site. And again, we're in, as a reminder, Foster City, California. Applying and interviewing. This was another question, just in general. How do I get an interview? How do you get an interview when you feel like you're just in an application pool of many? And I think that's a frustration of a lot of people maybe sitting there today. What's my background that's needed? That's usually a little bit more straightforward, but it's that question of, how do I get experience without experience? How do I get that job without having experience? And I would say that there's a lot of, like I said, do the internships, do the shadowing, do the volunteer work. Take something that maybe that's not exactly somebody walks into a room in a team. We need to know that you can work with us. You have to check your ego at the door. I think that's one of the key pieces here in order to be successful in these multifunctional teams. I'm going to finish up with this. I provided the overview of the career path before that I followed, and I had that asterisk that said, well, this is what LinkedIn said. Here's a deeper dive. It was full of speed bumps. It was full of pivots and twists and turns and maybe some failures. Did I know what I wanted to do? No. I was second semester sophomore at St. Norbert, and I didn't even know what my major was yet. I was like, I really like art history, but maybe I'm not going to get a job in that, I'll just say that I was the first in my family, in any generation, or any cousins or any relatives to go to college. I did not come from a family where, there was a pedigree where we knew that that's what was going to happen. I had to fight pretty hard. And if you're sitting there in that position, I want to congratulate you. I think it's not easy. The path is not made for you, and you have to have a lot of resilience. And maybe you're not going to know exactly what you're going to do, but keep pushing forward. I still didn't know what I wanted to do. I got my bachelor's and I actually took a gap year. I taught in elementary schools. I thought, oh, maybe I'm going to be a teacher. Maybe this is what I wanted to do. it was great to know that that is not what I was set out to do. I should not be an elementary school teacher. Check that box. And that's okay. And so I went to graduate school. I thought maybe I'm going to go with a master's. I don't know if this is really my thing. Is this really what I want to be doing? Maybe I want to go back and be teaching. And so I did a lot of college teaching at undergrads in the area while I was a graduate student to test that out. And then what did I want to do after that? I postdoced, but I didn't know if that's really what I wanted to do either. I ended up landing this job at LabCorp. It was in cardiovascular safety assessment. Now, you recall what I said I did for my PhD? It was ocular development. It had nothing to do with cardiovascular, but I knew how to learn. I knew how to play on teams well, and I knew how to network. And I think by then that's what really got me there. Did I know this is what I wanted to do at Gilead? I was pretty nervous. I was moving across the country. I had a family. I didn't know, was this going to work? And my advantage was that when I worked at LabCorp, I had a lot of clients at Gilead. And so I knew the group, I knew a lot of people, and I knew the mission of Gilead, and I knew the core values. And I think that's important when you're thinking about a company. What are the core values of the company? What do they stand for? And they're listed here. These are core values that are listed on Gilead's website. Integrity, you're bringing to the table things with honesty, transparency, inclusion. There's no exclusion at Gilead. That's not a word here. We're going to listen to all ideas, all concepts. Teamwork, I already talked about that. Accountability, I think what you're bringing to the table is really important. That goes with integrity and excellent, obviously. It's going to be high quality work. That's what you're bringing to the table. We have patients waiting for things. So I just wanted to walk through that to say it wasn't a straight line. It's okay if it's not a straight line. Failure's all right. And I know when I fail at my age, it doesn't feel good. Nobody wants to do that. It feels like moving backwards. But I think my backward steps gave me so much learning for the forward. And I know that's hard to hear is in terms of wisdom, but from my pathway, I think looking back, I go, yeah, there's a lot of twists and turns, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. I think the journey is your own. What I've talked about today, if anything resonates, that's great. Like I said, if nothing, that's okay too. And I think everything's tailored to yourself. So you really have to maybe do some deep thinking and go, is this anything that I want? And if not, you move on to the next thing, and that's okay. Or try it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And that's really, when I look back and I was making the slide deck, I thought, yeah, I had a lot of those. There's a lot of question marks up there, and I have to own that, and I'm okay with that. And I think I'm pretty happy where I landed. And so that's all I have. I'm at the end of my presentation. Whether you're sitting there live right now or streaming this later, I just want to thank you for hanging in there and listening to what I had to say. And like I said, if there's anything that resonated, I'm excited, and always follow up with questions.
Thank you very much, Carrie. That was a great presentation. I think we already have a couple of questions in the question box. I have 3 years of experience working in the pharma industry. Would you be able to provide an email address of a hiring manager to who I can send my resume to? Please let me know. Thank you so much. I don't have any comment about that, so I'm going to let Carrie weigh in on that. We actually have 2 questions. I'm sure Carrie can see them as well.
I do.
Are there any summer internship at the Laverne location for grad students? All right, Carrie, what do you think?
Yeah, the first one, I think I would really need to know more.
Maybe we should start by sending your resume to Carrie herself. Let her take care.
And Gilead's such a big company, and there's so many different locations, and I think during the talk, what I really wanted to show is that just there's so much heterogeneity in the interest levels. And so knowing where you want to go, what pocket are you interested in? What's out there? What are we hiring for right now? There's no way for me to know exactly what all the open positions are, and they're global. And so, if there's something specific that you want to chat about, let me know. But I think it's hard for me to address that just because I'm not sure, what's exactly open in what particular niche that someone's interested in for sure.
So what I would suggest is a sort of a follow-up kind of thing. I mean, Carrie is on LinkedIn, And I'm sure that if you send her a message on LinkedIn, she would likely respond back to you. Um, okay, well, Laverne location. I don't know. Maybe Carrie can speak to that.
And I don't know either. I'd have to go on that link. And if you saw that link on that slide, or even just Google Gilead summer internships, it'll bring you to that link, and you can sort through and see what exactly is available. I know what I've done for folks before is that they have sent me a CV. If I am familiar with the hiring manager, we can have a discussion. And if it applies to that position, that's great. And if it doesn't, we can talk too. Like I said, I think this is it's tough in the beginning. And if there's not something specifically there, just network. I think as I get to the stage, that's what I can be here for. If there's any networking opportunities, just, yeah, like you said, IM me through LinkedIn, happy to respond, happy to, tell you what I know and what I don't know.
Yeah, so I think another way to look at this, in my opinion, is networking. The short term benefit of networking isn't necessarily get a job next week. So it's important to understand what the purpose of networking is to build out your sphere of contacts and influence. It doesn't always necessarily translate to a job the next day, the next week, the next month. Something may not be available like right away. But if you're in somebody's sphere of influence, you're in somebody's sort of network, they will remember you, or you can circle back to them later on. It may not even be at this stage of your career yet. What I mean by that is you may have somebody in your network as you're finishing your bachelor's degree, and then nothing really happens now. And then you sort of go in a different direction. 2 years later, 3 years later, who knows, 5 years later, you run into the person again, or you reconnect and say, oh, yeah, you gave a talk when I was an undergrad, the CSU Biotech seminar thing back in January of 2025. And Katie says, yeah, I remember that. I was the person who asked if you could hire me, if you could link me to a hiring manager. And you said you didn't know if anything was specific or something. Now, maybe Carrie is the senior VP for clinical development by then. Well, I'm looking for someone in the clinical development arena. And Carrie says, well, you're in luck. I'm trying to hire some new people now. So my point is, don't always see networking as something that may necessarily yield a dividend right away. And we just came back from a symposium where we had an entire session on career networking issues. And one of the take-home messages I got from there was that when you network, always also remember that networking is a two-way street. I know that it is typically seen as someone looking for something, but networking can also be somebody offering something. I think this is how to maximize the benefit of networking. So please, you can consider Carrie to be in your network from now on. She may not do anything for you, quote and unquote, right now, but she might make an introduction for you. Okay, you might say, look, can you introduce me to somebody in your network? I mean, from LinkedIn. You can see other people's linkages in LinkedIn, and somebody can say, yeah, I know this student, or I know this person, and send an intro email, and then you guys can take it from there.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said. And it's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Yeah.
You're building your pool up. I think some advice that I got earlier on was also, it's almost a part-time job. Put a calendar reminder once a month. What can I do to network right now? Who else could I reach out to? Who can I just say hi to again? And whenever you do reach out to somebody, this is other advice I've gotten is, I always ask for one or two more names, so that you're sort of,
Wow.
you're sort of, your web is growing, And so if somebody came to me and said, they're looking for something, and I'd say, oh, I don't know. Always ask me, do you know somebody else that knows? Can you recommend? Just keep that in your brain. Always, can you recommend to other people? Would you be willing to give their contact information? So that one person that you connect with is actually worth almost three, right? And I think people that are well into their career, the majority of them, they're always willing to help. I really believe that, you know.
That's great. We have any other questions? We're right on the hour, 12 p.m. We probably can still take, one or two more questions before we wrap this up. All right, I do have a question for Carrie.
All right.
One of the questions that always come from our student is a lot of students are shy, and we had a session yesterday in Orange County at the symposium where one of the panelists basically just asked everybody go around the room, scan people's LinkedIn QR codes, and just connect with them or send a connection request. And I really learned from that part of the session how LinkedIn can provide sort of a safe way to build network. If you're not able, okay, you may not be able to go to lots of events in person, but LinkedIn can be used as a networking platform. But I think what also came out of that session is how do you break the ice when you do go to in-person events? It's a bit intimidating. You're 21 years old, 20-year-old undergraduate. You see this person at a conference and you would like to say hi to them or introduce yourself, and you're not exactly sure how do you do that? What do you say? Or you get in front of them and you freeze. You open your mouth, nothing comes out. I mean, what's your advice?
Yeah. I think the situation that you're describing right now has become more and more common. And we were talking before the webinar started just about impacts of remote working, impacts of being behind a keyboard the majority of the time, of course, from pandemic years. And I think what you're describing is just all too common. If I could give one piece of advice to somebody who is second guessing themselves, doesn't want to, think about, okay, what are the chances that that person's going to say, go away, I don't want to talk to you? Have you ever seen that happen? Has anybody ever seen that happen? Never have seen that happen. Never. And what are the chances that that's actually going to happen to you? It's very, very small. The person might say, I don't have time right now, but I am me. That's okay, right? I mean, we're all humans. And I think, I wanted to describe my career path, the question marks. I've been there, I don't even know what I want to do. I got student debt. What am I going to do? They don't want to hear from me. What do I have to give? That's not the point, right? I think as we go through our careers, the vast majority of people that I've met want to give back. And I think you and I talked about that at Carlsbad. We want to give back. It's just an innate response, because we know it hasn't been easy and there's twists and turns, and that's okay, as I said. But I think to say to yourself, what are the chances they're actually going to say scram? No, they're not going to do that, right? What's the worst that can happen? So to me, that's like the one thing maybe to run through your mind if you have those thoughts going through there. And if it's too much for you, yeah, go through the keyboard, But if you can do a face-to-face, do that. It makes all the difference.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, well, all right. Well, thank you. I think that's Dr. Connie Stone's comment. That's great.
Thank you.
And by the way, we do have this session recorded, and we will share this with students. The semester isn't fully on yet. I think classes begin in a couple more days or something like that. And so even for students who are just coming back, they're probably just settling down.
Yeah.
So I want to thank Carrie for today's presentation. We really appreciate you. We appreciate taking our time to share with us your own journey from the young woman who was an undergraduate in northern Wisconsin to running the preclinical program at Gilead Sciences. I'm pretty sure that as an undergrad, you had no clue that you will be doing this in 2025.
No, you're absolutely right. Not even knowing it existed. So, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for taking the opportunity and for taking the time, and I really appreciate it. Please reach out with any questions, and hopefully, like as I said, even if 5% took something away, I would be thrilled. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All
Thank
right.
you very
Take care.
much.